Alright, hello everyone. This is Mr. Johnson, and whoever's watching this video, whether you're a student or a parent trying to figure out your kid's homework, uh, welcome. This is a video for my Algebra 2 class, and it's going to be dealing with factoring. So factoring, where does it come from, how do we use it, and there's actually a really cool trick that we can use to make factoring really simple. So if you need to ever pause this video, feel free to do so, and that's what this is for. So I'm going to start off with, what is factoring in the first place? And factoring is really just distribution, but it's going in reverse. So distribution is multiplying into parentheses, but factoring is going from something that doesn't have parentheses and going backwards and putting parentheses in it. Okay, so that's our base knowledge of factoring and where we're going to go. So as you can see in this example, if we have 2 times the quantity x minus 1, we just distribute in and we get 2x minus 2. That is distribution. Factoring, however, is just going backwards from that. So we're going to start off with 2x minus 2, and we need to see what does each term in there have in common. And in this case, we have a 2 in common. So we're going to pull out a 2, so 2 divided by 2 is going to leave us with 1, and we have an x there still. So I'm going to draw an arrow to the x. So we have 1x, and then if we take 2 divided by 2, that just leaves us with 1. Okay, and we can think of that as 2 times 1, and that's what's left there. And we're subtracting between the two. We have to keep the sign the same. So factoring is really just going backwards from distribution. It's not that hard. Alright. We are going to be using factoring to solve for quadratics, and so we just have some examples to get through that. But first, we are going to give us some rules, or we're going to do some rules. So if you have a quadratic in standard form, and remember standard form is just ax squared plus bx plus c, where a is a number, b is a number, and c is a number. Then we can factor it using what's called the x method, and that's what I'm going to show you here. So step number 1 for the x method is we need to try to write the quadratic in standard form, if we can. And remember that is ax squared plus bx plus c. And if we don't have all the pieces, then we just need to use we need to use 0 for placeholders. And it's important to know what values a, b, and c are because they're important for our factors, and when we learn the quadratic formula, they're going to be important for that as well. So step number 2, we need to make this diagram. This is the x diagram. And so what we put in the top is we're going to multiply a times c and put that in the top, and then in the bottom we're just going to put b. Now our numbers need to add to b and multiply to get us a times c. So the spots to the left and the right are going to be the two numbers that add to b and then multiply to get a times c, which is that top number. Step number 3 is a important step because these two numbers are really important to the factors that we're going to be getting from our quadratic. And so there are going to be different situations that we have to look out for. And if a is not equal to 1, then we're going to have to do an extra step actually. If a is not equal to 1, we need to divide those two numbers by a. Okay, and we probably are going to get fractions, and what we need to do with that is we need to simplify those fractions. After we do that, we need to take the factor that is not a whole number And if they're both fractions, then we have to do it for both of them. But we need to multiply by the denominator of that fraction to get whole numbers in that factor. So we're just going to multiply through to get whole numbers for both fractions. For both factors. And once we do that, we're really finished. The best way to probably see this is to do a couple of examples. So we're going to go through a couple of simple examples and then work up to the more complicated ones. Example number 1 is if we have x squared plus 4x plus 4. So we're going to draw our x chart. We know that a is 1, it's implied, and then c is 4, so we need to take 1 times 4 and get 4. That goes in the top. Then we put b in the bottom, and that's 4. So we need to add to get 4 and multiply to get 4. So I'm just writing out our factors. 1 times 4 is 4, 2 times 2 is 4, and then we have the negatives. Now I see that 2 times 2 is 4, and it adds to 4, so I know my factors are 2 and 2. So when I'm going a little fast here, when I put those in my numbers, all I have to do is put them as my factors. So I will have x plus 2 times x plus 2. And then what I'm doing here is I'm just checking. So I'm taking and foiling it, and when I FOIL it back, I should get what I started. So x times x is x squared plus 2 times x plus 2 times x plus 4. That gives me x squared plus 4x plus 4, which is precisely what I started off with, so we're good. Example number 2, flying along here. If we have x squared minus 7x plus 10, we're going to make my x chart. We have 1 times 10, goes in the top, which is 10, and then we put negative 7 down in the bottom. We need to add to get negative 7, multiply to get 10. So 1 and 10 are a factor, 2 and 5 are a factor, negative 1 and negative 10 are a factor, and negative 2 and negative 5 are a factor. And if we look at those, we can kind of figure out that negative 2 and negative 5 are going to solve that puzzle. So my factors are going to be x minus 2 and then x minus 5. We're just taking those numbers and putting them with x. So we need to check. We can have x times x, which is going to give us x squared, then x times negative 5, which is minus 5x, and then negative 2 times x, which is minus 2x, and then plus 10, because negative 2 times negative 5 is 10. We combine like terms, and we get x squared minus 7x plus 10. And that's what we started off with, so we know we're good. So the factors of x squared minus 7x plus 10 are x minus 2 and x minus 5. Example number 3. I'm not going to give you all the pieces. We're just going to have x squared minus 9. So if we put in some substituting zeros, that will be x squared plus 0x minus 9. 1 times negative 9 is negative 9, and then we need to put 0 in the bottom. So we need things that multiply to give us negative 9 and add to 0. So 1 and negative 9, 3 and negative 3, negative 3 and 3, and negative 1 and 9. And if we can see, those middle ones will both add to 0 and multiply to give me negative 9. It doesn't matter which way I put them. They're both the same thing. It's just the order, and that doesn't really matter. So my factors are x minus 3 times x plus 3. And we can always check this, remember, by distributing. So we will get x squared, then plus 3x, minus 3x, and then minus 9. Our x's will cancel out. They add to 0 in the middle, so we're left with x squared minus 9, which is what we started with. So the factors of x squared minus 9 are x minus 3 and x plus 3. And actually, this problem is a special case, and there's a name for this special case. It is called the difference of two squares. And the reason we call it that is because we have x squared, and then 9 is really 3 squared. So we have x squared minus 3 squared. Example number 4. If we have 2x squared plus 11x, that should be 11x there, plus 14. This is going to be one of the ones where we have to do an extra step because a isn't 1. So we take 2 times 14, which is 28, put that in the top, and then we put 11 in the bottom. So numbers that multiply to 28 and add to 11. So I'm just writing out our factors, 1 and 28, 2 and 14, 4 and 7. negative 1 and negative 28, negative 2 and negative 14, negative 4 and negative 7. Now if you kind of knew beforehand 4 and 7 and you had that hunch, that's great. You don't have to write out all the factors. Now remember that a is 2, so we need to divide both of those numbers, 4 and 7, by 2. Okay? And then simplify, so the left is going to be 2, and then 7 divided by 2, we just have to leave it. There's no whole number that comes out of that. Our factors will then be x plus 2 times x plus 7 halves. Now, this is kind of where the tricky part comes. We have to take that fraction, 7 halves, and we need to make it into whole numbers, so we need to multiply by 2 everything in that factor. So the 7 halves will be multiplied by 2, and the x will be multiplied by 2. So in the end, we will have x plus 2 times 2x plus 7. And that is our answer. That's the factors of that quadratic up above. And as always, if we're not really sure, we should probably check our work. So x times 2x is 2x squared. X times 7 is plus 7x. 2 times 2x is plus 4x, and then 2 times 7 is 14. Combining like terms gives us 2x squared plus 11x plus 14, which checks out. So, awesome. Very last example. Let's take 20x squared minus 11x, and then minus 3. So we're going to make our x chart here. We need to take 20 times negative 3, which is negative 60. Then we need to put negative 11 in the bottom. That's the number we're adding to. So the factors could be negative 1 and 60, negative 2 and 30, negative 3 and 20, negative 4 and 15. And as I'm going through these factors, I'm thinking to myself, numbers that add to 11 or have a relationship that will be 11. And so negative 4 and 15 don't, but what about negative 15 and 4? Just so happens that they do, so we put those in as our numbers. Remember our a value is 20, so we need to divide those by 20. And then we need to simplify those. So the left is negative 3/4, and then the right is going to be 1/5. Okay, so both of these happen to be fractions. It's perfectly fine. So our factors will be x minus 3/4 and then x plus 1/5. Now we need to take those and make those into whole numbers. So we'll multiply the right by 5, so the x and the 1/5 by 5. And the left we will need to multiply by 4. So we will take 3/4 times 4, and we will take x times 4. When we do that, we will get 4x minus 3 in parentheses, and then 5x plus 1 in parentheses. And these are our factors. And as always, we can check our work. So we'll take 4x times 5x, which will give us 20x squared, and then 4x times 1 is plus 4x. And then negative 3 times 5x is minus 15x. And then negative 3 times 1 is minus 3. Now we can combine some like terms, so we'll have 20x squared minus 11x minus 3, which is what we started off with, which means we got the answer. Alright, so like I said, if you need to go back and watch that video, I would highly recommend it. You can always pause it and write down notes. Or if you don't need to write notes, you get it, then that's awesome. The homework that you need to do is to pick 15 questions from that worksheet and do the X method and factor those. And that will be due at some point here soon. So thank you very much, and I'll see you guys soon.